Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Most people think that Stanford came from Hewlett and Packard in the garage or from Frederick Terman in the engineering school. But actually, that's not my point of view. My point of view is that Stanford had its roots in the gold rush. And so Stanford was started because of gold rush money. And if you think about the gold rush, you say, okay, I'm sitting here in a river and I'm panning for gold. And somebody right next to me fishes out a huge rock of gold. What do I conclude from that? Do I conclude that they're smarter than I am? Do I conclude that they're more able than I am somehow, or that they're more persistent? Maybe what I should conclude is I just need to show up in the river. Part of it's about showing up. And so, when I was a student at Stanford, you'd be sitting there in an engineering class and Scott McNealy would give a lecture, or Steve Jobs would show up, or Adam Osborne at the time that Osborne computers mattered. But whoever it was, you'd sit there and you'd look at that person, you'd say, okay, they're probably smarter than I am right now. They're not that much smarter. They just showed up. They took risks. And so Stanford was the first place I'd ever been exposed to where the default assumption was, let's be idealistic. Let's take risks. The burden of proof is on the people who are negative. Everywhere else I'd ever been, you could take risks, but people would give you the 1,000 reasons you would fail. And you can never describe the reasons you'll succeed a priori. You could never describe why Twitter would have a business model back in the day. You could never describe why people would rent textbooks. Every startup's impossible at the beginning. And so Stanford was the first place that I ever attended where people said, that's a great idea. Why don't you drop out? We won't hold it against you. You can always come back. And so I believe that the roots of Stanford are actually the genetic code, the strands of DNA at Stanford are the gold rush. And this idea that just have the courage to try. Don't be afraid that it's wacky and controversial. Just have the courage to try.
It's interesting because everyone has a story about someone sitting next to them or someone they've bumped into. Nolan Bushnell said something very similar. He's the founder of Atari.
He was in that class too.
He was. He did.
I had lunch with him.
Really?
And you know what he said? He said the best thing about America is nobody gets pissed when you have bankruptcy. And he's like, no other country's like that.
I was going to say whatever it was that he said was going
awesome.
to be memorable.
Yeah.
But I was at EA and just down the street out of college, and I remember one of the founders of YouTube came right after they started, and he couldn't work a PowerPoint. And I remember thinking, dude, this guy at YouTube, he can't even work PowerPoint? Like, I can work PowerPoint. I could build YouTube,
Yeah.
That's obviously not right. But
there's a little more to it than that.
Right, a little bit more. But do you think, is that unique to Silicon Valley? Is it unique to this culture?
Yeah, and
created from
YouTube,
Stanford?
I've got issues with, we can talk about
Yeah,
that
we're
later.
gonna talk about
YouTube
that
makes
more,
me
hopefully.
sad in some ways, but
Sorry.
we'll talk about that, yeah.
But is
Sorry,
that
what was your
unique?
question?
Is that unique to Silicon Valley that these people that just are all around you, that are next to you, that you see them and you can say, hey, he's not that smart, or hey, if he did it, I could do it, or is that something that happens around the world? What's your experience?
I think that Silicon Valley has a cultural advantage of there is a widespread belief that you can have massively asymmetric high returns by expanding the pie and taking a risk. And there are other places in the world where there are people who believe those things, but there is nowhere in the world where that is the mainstream belief to the degree that that's true in Silicon Valley, and that's its fundamental competitive advantage. It's not that it has more marketing people or engineering people or PR folks or consultants or capital. It's Silicon Valley has triumphed because of that set of ideas. And the fact that it is the only place in the world I've ever been where the default assumption among most people is idealism and growing the pie rather than claiming your slice.